Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about how you can extend and have more powerful modularity in your NixOS config by creating your own options and then using those options and some of the other options with if-else statements to make a conditional config. This would allow you to set the values of various options based on the values of other options, which is really powerful. Now, this is sort of a direct sequel to my previous video on NixOS modularity. Some of the stuff that we'll be glossing over in this video is what was gone over in depth in that video. So definitely check out that video if you haven't already. Link will be in the description down below, and I'll also have a little card pop up in the corner somewhere around now. So in any case, let's get started. First, we're going to talk about how you can define your own custom options. So to do that, let's go to our VM here and get to our config. Okay, so the first thing you might try to do to define your own custom option is just to set the option like you would normally as a variable in another programming language. So for example, you might try just in your configuration.nix somewhere, writing, I don't know, my arbitrary option equals, and then setting it to something like stuff. Now, this is intuitive, of course. This is how you would probably do it in another language like Python or JavaScript or something like that. But you will notice pretty immediately that if you try to rebuild using that, so let's rebuild here, it will error out like so. Here's what it says: the option my does not exist. So again, what this means here, my is an attribute set that has arbitrary as an attribute set, and then as part of that, there's the option which we're trying to declare as stuff. Now, it's telling us that my does not exist as an option, and there's a reason for that. The only options that we're allowed to declare are the options that are defined in an attribute set called options. Okay, that's quite a mouthful. So what does that mean? If we want to include our own custom option, we must place definitions for what those options are in this special attribute set called options. So we write options, write in our attribute set notation here, and then this is where we will place our own custom options. The way that this options attribute set works is different from how we define the rest of our config. So instead of just setting the option to some sort of value, we have to actually tell Nix what this option is. What sort of things are we allowed to set it to? What is the data type of the option? And in order to do this, we're going to need to use a function from lib. So if you haven't already, make sure you have lib up here in your arguments section. And so we're going to use the makeOption function. So my arbitrary option equals lib.makeOption. And from this, we're going to have to pass 2 bits of information about the option. The first being the type. So in this case, I want to make it a string. So I'm going to use the type lib.types.str for string. And the second bit of information we need to pass it is the default. So this is the default value that it will have if you don't set it anywhere else in your config. So I will just give it a default value of stuff for this example. Now, this is all well and great. We have a custom option defined here in this options attribute set. And so if we go ahead and save this here and we try rebuilding again, we're going to notice that there is now a new error. module, blah, 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 has an unsupported attribute boot. So what's going on here? This is caused by introducing a top-level config or options attribute. So essentially what is happening here is this entire time that we've been writing our config, we've been actually writing it in a bit of a shorthand. See, when we write the configuration declarations for these options, we typically write, we typically just write the option. But technically, the actual full path, you might say, or the full attribute set notation of these options actually has a top level attribute config. So technically boot.loader.grub.enable is really config.boot.loader.grub.enable. And that's what all of these actually are. So in normal attribute set notation with Nix, we can write this as a top level attribute set, like they were saying in the error message, sort of like that. Space these over and round that out. And so you can sort of see now, this is actually the technical full structure of a NixOS module: an imports list, an options attribute set, and a config attribute set. Options is, of course, where we import other Nix files as modules. Options is where we define our own new options. And config is where all of the actual declarations for the options are placed. If you don't put the options attribute set or the config attribute set directly, it will assume that everything is a part of config. But this is really what's happening in the background. So if we go ahead and try to rebuild now, this should work. So from here, it's important to remember that options are much more powerful than something like variables. Going off the last tutorial about NixOS modularity, we can set this option in multiple different locations in the config to be different values, and then we can give those different values different priority levels. So for example, if I wanted to set the arbitrary option that we just declared here to something like cool in this configuration.nix file, but then in some other file, some other module, maybe like the hardware configuration, I wanted to sort of override that, I could use something like lib.make force, and maybe I wanted to make it awesome or something like that. And so this lib.make force makes it a higher priority for that value than just normally setting it. So if we rebuilt it like this, the arbitrary option here would actually have the value awesome. And another thing to note as well is we defined the arbitrary option as an option in this other configuration.nix file. But as soon as it's defined in at least one module that's being included in an options section, that option can be set in any module file. And in fact, this is where all of the options actually come from. If you go and look at the Nix package's source code, in the Nix code for every single package, the options are defined this way. And at the end of the day, we're just importing those modules so we have access to those options. But in any case, from here, there might be two things that you're wondering. One thing for the custom options is, well, it's great that we have access to strings, but what are the other types? How do I include other types? I put together a list of some common types here. And so some notable ones are, for example, lib.types.anything, so accept anything. Strings are str. If you want a string that can't be empty, you could use the non-empty string, str. Booleans, kind of important. Sometimes you might want to use numbers, but maybe not that often in a NixOS config. Paths, you can actually have the type be a path to a file or directory on the system or in the config. And then, of course, we have lists and so on and so on. These are a few that you may want to start with because they're since they're the easiest to sort of understand and work with. But if you want to explore more of the types, I think actually the best way of learning about these is actually by reading the source code, which is kind of unfortunate. But if you want to explore more, you can check out the source code. And I'll link this specific file in the Nix packages source code in the description. But essentially, if we go here, and we scroll down to about, I think it's like line 200 something. Yep, right around here. So types equals, and then these are all the different types that are by default included in the lib of Nix packages that you can check out. So like there's raw data type, there's the anything data type, unspecified, bool by or, a boolean merged using or, and many, many more, which you can explore at your, on your own time. But yeah, definitely lots of interesting types that you could learn about and experiment with. Now, another thing that you're probably wondering is, how do I make this custom option useful? Because you probably realize that it's awesome, that we were able to make a custom option and set it to some sort of value. But right now, it's not really doing anything for our config. It's not really helping us at all. And this is where we can start talking about some of the logic with if-else statements. If-else statements, conditionals, are sort of a staple of programming in general. So we need to be able to use them in Nix as well. Now, since Nix is a declarative language, the way the if-else statements are sort of formulated might not be super intuitive if you're used to if-else statements in other programming languages, especially imperative programming languages. Now, imperative means it's a programming language that does a sequence of steps, whereas in Nix, it's more declarative, meaning that you just declare things and you're not really doing things in steps in a way. So to show you the difference of what I'm talking about here, Bash is a imperative language. So if we had an example Bash script, and we write just a quick if condition, then do some action, like some body of commands, right? Else, do something else, some other sequence or body of commands. And then we phi to end the if-else statement. So again, the idea of this is if some condition is satisfied, then do a sequence of things. Otherwise, do a different sequence of things. Now in Nix, it's a little bit different. You have to think about it slightly differently. If-else statements are not used to perform different sets of actions. They're more so used to declare different values conditionally. So I'll show you an example. So we'll do example.nix, and here we go. So let's say I just write an expression like let x equals true. And then I want to declare another variable, message. And I want the message variable, its value, to be dependent on whatever x's value is. So to do this, we would set the value of message to be the expression if x equals true, then x is true, else x is false. So you can sort of see how you think about it differently. It's not if x equals true, message equals x is true. It's more message equals if x equals true, then x is true, else x is false. What's really going on here is that this entire thing is an expression that is what is setting the message variable. Again, because Nix is declarative, we're not allowed to do sequences of things. We're not allowed to do anything. That's why Nix is hard. So the conditional statements are more so formulated like this. So if we actually ran this, we could just have the output be message. We can actually run this and see since X is true, when we actually run it, it will report X is true. And of course, we set X to false, then it'll say X is false. On another note here as well, you may have noticed this, maybe not. Since X is actually just directly a Boolean here, we could just say if X. Like if false, then it's gonna use the else here, X is false. Otherwise, you know, if we had X set to true, it's sort of directly placing that Boolean value into the expression here. So that is another trick that you can have up your sleeve as well. Now, this Nix expression showing how Nix works is not exactly what you would include in your config. So how could we use this in our own configuration? A really good example showing this is by conditionally including different packages on your system in, say, the environment.system packages or home.packages if you're using Home Manager. And I'll show you what I mean. So if we go to the environment.system packages, here it is. And I'll just here like that. Let's say I wanted to optionally add certain packages based on certain configuration options. Say I want a certain package if I'm using X11 or an X11 window manager, and I want a totally different package if I'm running something like Wayland. In my case, the only two window manager configurations I have set up are Xmonad and Hyperland. So if I was setting this up, I might reference those two configurations. So how would this work? Well, we have a system packages block declared here already. And one trick that we can use to add more packages to this conditionally is by using this plus plus operator, which adds new things to the list. So for example, if I did plus plus, if I did plus plus, and then I put in something like packages.rofi, removing the semicolon there. What this would do is it would have the environment.system packages be a list with packages.vim, packages.wget, and packages.git, and then it would add on this packages.rofi at the end here. Now, Rofi is my app launcher of choice on Xmonad, but on Hyperland, I actually prefer a Wayland only one called Fuzzle. So if I wanted to conditionally have this additional package be based on whether or not I have Xmonad or Hyperland enabled, what we would do is write an expression where this is that actually decides that for us. So I'm going to start by putting all of this in parentheses. Parentheses in Nix kind of work like parentheses in math. They're kind of like, you know, order of operations or like containing expressions inside of them. That's how you can sort of think of them. And to write this statement, we need the if statement to be able to figure out whether or not Xmonad or Hyperland is enabled. So we can just access that information by calling it from the config attribute set. So for example, if config.services.xserver.windowmanager.xmonad.enable equals true. That's quite a bit of stuff there. Then this expression should return packages.rofi, which would be what gets added on to the environment.system packages. And in fact, I'm going to put this in some parentheses as well, just to show everything that's going on. Okay. After this, we're going to need an else part of this. So else, and for this, I'm actually going to write another if statement, and you'll see why in a moment. If config.programs.hyperland.enable equals true, and let's make sure that this is in parentheses as well. Then we want this to return packages.fuzzle. Otherwise, we want it to return an empty list. So there we go. Again, let's look at this whole phrase here. And in fact, I can probably separate these out just a little bit so that we can see more about what's going on. There we go. So what we're doing is we're adding on to the environment.system packages list with an expression. This is an if-else expression. We first ask if this config.services.xserver.windowmanager.xmonad.enable is true. That is what would be enabling xmonad. And if that is true, then it returns the Rofi package, and that gets added on to the system packages. Otherwise, we check if Hyperland is enabled, then we add on the fuzzle package. Otherwise, we don't add on anything. Now, we have to have this last else statement and have else an empty list in this case here, because in Nix, when you use an if-else statement, you have to have both the if and the else. You can't just have if-then like you could in, say, Python or JavaScript. You have to specify both options, because if you don't specify the else, then what does it know what to set it to? It'll sort of just error out at that point. So in my case here, we could try rebuilding, and this shouldn't actually technically do anything because in this test VM, I actually got KDE. But if we try rebuilding this, let's see what happens. I forgot a semicolon, of course. There we go. No, I had an extra parentheses. That's what I had. There we go. Okay, we try rebuilding this then. It'll, of course, at least rebuild, telling us that the syntax is okay. But it didn't really do anything for me right here, because, you know, this is my VM tutorial setup. But in any case, then these, of course, are, you know, some tricks that you can use in your configuration. These if-else statements can, of course, be used to set options just by themselves. And you can access whatever the values are of options that you set in your config by referencing them using this top level attribute set config. One more thing I do want to mention before we end off here is if you're using Home Manager and you got a home.nix file, all of the things that we talked about with regards to the configuration.nix work identically in the home.nix. So for example, if I wanted to add some custom options to my Home Manager config, I can put this in an options attribute set like so, and awesome Home Manager option is whatever lib.makeOption. If you do that, just make sure that the rest of your configuration is in the top level config attribute set. And then at this point, if you want to reference the values of other options and use if-else statements like this in Home Manager, you can, of course, do that by referencing things using the top level config attribute. So let's say I wanted my new awesome home manager option to be set to whatever my username is. I could set it to config.home.username. And if I wanted to have an if-else statement here, I could of course do that as well. But this will all work in similar fashion. So once you learn how to do this with the configuration.nix and normal NixOS, it works the same way for Home Manager. Anyways, I hope you liked the video. I hope you learned some cool tricks that you can start incorporating into your NixOS configuration. If you liked the video, please leave a like, leave a comment, letting me know what you liked about it or what other content you'd like to see me do. If you disliked the video, please leave a dislike on it and let me know what I can improve on next time. And in fact, next time, another NixOS tutorial, we're going to extend this modularity even further on the topic of NixOS flakes by talking about something called special args and extra special args. So make sure you're subscribed and you got notifications on if you're interested in more NixOS content. Anyways, have a great rest of your day as always, and I'll see you all next time.